Hello guys, my name is Suhas and in this video we are going to build an entire gaming system in a budget of around 7,000 rupees. That is roughly the same price what you would pay for a brand new GT1030. So alright, let's get to it. So basically the idea for this build came from the fact that a lot of older games, and by old I mean games around 2010 time period and before, don't run on Windows 10 anymore. I mean some of them do, but not all of them. They used to, but not anymore, and I have a lot of these games which I like to play sometimes. It's not that I would start a campaign and then finish it all over again. I just sometimes feel like playing them for a couple of hours, and sadly, I can't do that. Games like BioShock, Infinite, Sniper Elite 3 are such games that don't run on my Windows 10 system anymore. So, this gave me an idea of building a nostalgic gaming system powered by Windows 7 and hardware which could be called decent system for the time. Then I had another idea, why not set a target budget, and that is where the GT1030 came in. I had initially thought of using this graphics card, but then I realized it's not worth the money and simply thought of sourcing used hardware from 2008-2010 time period with the target cost of building the entire system for roughly the same amount as a new GT1030 would cost. And this is what I settled on. For the CPU, I got a Core 2 Quad Q8200 for 850 rupees. It's got 4 cores clocked at 2.33 GHz, which I overclocked to 2.8 GHz. For the RAM, I got 2 sticks of 2 GB DDR2 that equals to 4 gigabytes of DDR2 RAM running at 667 MHz for 600 bucks because simply I went with the cheapest option I could find. The choice of the motherboard was also similar, and it's an ASUS P5 KPL AMPS, and it was also simply the cheapest one I found, and it supports overclocking, and a friend of mine sold it for 650 bucks. The choice of GPU was initially a GTX 460, but I did not find one at a reasonable price, as most of them I found were priced close to what a 750 Ti would sell for. So it did not make economic sense, so I settled for a GT545 OEM variant. I paid 1,500 bucks for it, and the OEM variant differs from the standard 545 in one significant way, which is that it uses 1 GB of DDR5 memory instead of 1.5 GB of DDR3 memory. It's also based on the Kepler architecture with a GPU clocked at 871 MHz and the memory clocked at 1000 MHz. I also managed to overclock it to 981 MHz and 1265 MHz for the core and memory clocks respectively. For the power supply, I am currently using a Seasonic S12 650 watt PSU which was lying around, but I have found a cooler Master MWE 450 white for around 1500 bucks, which I will eventually be using for this system. The boot drive I chose is an Intel SSD, which is also an OEM variant which I bought for 1000 rupees, and it supports links of up to 3 Gbps via the SATA connector. And for storage I'm using certified repaired Seagate Barracuda 500 GB HDD. One thing to remember is that you must have patience if you're trying to build a system with such tight budgets, as you have to wait for the right deals to come along. I have bought most of the stuff from Facebook Marketplace, but some from the local markets as well. Keyboard mouse, I'm using a Lenovo combo priced at 400 rupees, which I bought from local market, and a VGA cable for around 100 rupees, and a Windows 7 license from a random online reseller for 350 rupees. As far as monitor is considered, I am using an old TV with an assumption that everyone has at least one TV at home, and most modern and older TVs do support VGA inputs. If you happen to have one that does not, this GPU also supports HDMI, although you would need a mini HDMI to a standard HDMI cable, which would drive the cost up. One big thing that is currently missing in this build is a cabinet, and I'm trying to find one that is all white. something from the Pentium 3 era type systems. So either I'll use that type of a cabinet or build a case of my own, the DIY route. But for this video, I will be setting this system up as a test bench, an open test bench, but will do a full system build in a follow-up video. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a DIY version or an old Pentium style chassis build for this configuration. Though I have factored in the cost of an old semi-functional PC case in the final cost, as long as you're not being picky with what you are getting, you might even find one for free as well. So with all the hardware introduction taken care of, and now let's get to assembling the hardware. Alright, so I'm done with assembling the system and I've installed Windows and all other requisite softwares. You can see the system is up and running, but it does not look as appealing as it should. Well, because cables, but it is functional and it will also be aesthetic once I fit all the components in a suitable case. Now let's get to testing the performance of our system. Starting with Windows 7 Experience Index, and I know that this is not a reliable indicator of performance, but nevertheless, I really wanted to see the metrics as when I was using an old Windows 7 laptop, it never went beyond a 3.2 range. So I was surprised to see a WEI score of 7.3, and it was the same for all the components. However, if I were to disable all the overclocks that I have been applied to the CPU, GPU and loosen up the RAM timings as well, the overall score would fall to 7.1, which is also a number good enough to look at. Now coming to games, all the games were tested at 1360 into 768 resolution, and we'll start with Sniper Elite 3 at medium settings. The average frame rate was 62 FPS with 1% low at 48 FPS. And given the relatively slow paced nature of the game, you could even crank the details too high to get a 30 FPS playable experience. Moving on to Battlefield Bad Company 2 on high details, it averaged around 54 FPS with 1% lows at 39 FPS. Though with a fast-paced shooter, the frame dips are much more apparent, it still makes for a decent gaming experience. Next up, Batman Arkham Asylum on the highest settings. The average frame rate was 62 FPS, which seems like an artificial limit as it did not go beyond this figure no matter the settings used. 1% lows being a modest 43 FPS, the gameplay experience was smooth enough with few hiccups here and there. I remember playing this game with a frame rate of a cinematic 24 FPS on my old compact laptop with GeForce 8200M GS GPU and at the lowest possible potato settings. So this was definitely a fine experience. Max Payne 3 is still one of my favorite shooters and its performance was also in line with what I've come to expect with this sort of system, with the average frame rate in DirectX 10 of 65 FPS and 1% lows of 37 FPS, making it also a decent gaming experience. BioShock 2 on max settings was a fluid experience and this game still looks surprisingly good given its age, especially the water reflections, with a frame rate of 145 and 72 for the average and 1% low values respectively. Call of Duty Black Ops, which was another game I played on potato mode with an 8200M GS back in the day, but with this system the performance was decent with the highest settings, the average frame rate being 56 FPS and 1% lows of 40 FPS, though at times it was the CPU which was working harder than the GPU, maxing out at 100% and staying there for a while, though normally it stayed in low to mid 90s. I suspect the reason being that the game favors faster clocked dual cores more than the moderately clocked quad cores, which was normal for the games back then. Now coming to the PC melting game, which was Crysis at high settings and not very high settings, The average frame rate was 46 FPS and 1% low dropping down to 17 FPS. But yes, you can get a smoother experience by lowering the settings down one notch. Overall, I was quite satisfied with the performance of this system, and with Windows 7, which has a better support for older games, I plan to use this system as a retro gaming and emulator as well. And since the performance of the system was quite respectable, I also decided to test GTA 5 on this system as well, since if somebody were to build this system, they would naturally try to play newer games as well. Though, if that is the case, I would recommend going for a slightly higher budget and find yourselves a Sandy Bridge i5 at the minimum. So GTA 5 was also tested at 1360 into 768 with all settings set to normal, and being a relatively newer game for the system, it was the CPU that was struggling and it constantly stayed in mid 90s, peaking up to 100% frequently, while the GPU was cruising at a comfortable high 60s and low 70s, with its 1 GB VRAM being the limiting factor in cranking the visual settings up a notch. That being said, with an average frame rate of 54 FPS and minimums of 24 FPS, it turned out to be a playable experience, and the stutters were not as bad as I expected, given the game is known to heavily stutter on 4 gigabytes of RAM. So this is it for our nostalgic gaming PC for the price of a GT 1030. Well, more or less for the price of a single GT 1030. If you like this video, leave a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what sort of a build would you plan in a similar budget, or would you extend your budget ever so slightly to accommodate even better hardware. And see you in the next video.